Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. Today we've got a very special guest in Matthew. Thank you for coming here, and we're going to be talking about the history of art.
Pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me.
So yes, today we are joined by Matthew Olivier. Matthew, in mine and Dan's opinion, is perhaps one of the most famous arts historians in the world. And that is because he boasts several 100,000 followers across social media platforms, in which he makes some very, very interesting and sort of entertaining videos in the perspective of actually a British voice. So that was the first thing we're expecting today. But it's great to have you on today, Matthew.
It's so good. Everything sounds better in a British accent. I always felt so. I thought it was appropriate for my writing style and storytelling, and I'm so honored to be here with you guys today. It's such a nice thing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So the first question would be sort of a bit more general,
Mm-hmm.
but what made you be interested in art and the history of art? What first sort of sparked that inside of you?
Yeah. It's a pretty interesting story. I work primarily as an artist. That's my job. I work as a painter, and initially, when I had gotten into painting, I got into painting pretty late in my life. So you start doing something and you start off, you're not very good, which was the case for me. I was just throwing paint on the canvas, didn't really know what I was doing, didn't understand the greater picture, and I had this incredible experience. One of my first collectors, who has become one of my best friends, is a builder, and he built a large private gallery for one of the largest art collectors in Colorfield, in Canada. Maybe he might be the largest Colorfield collector in the world. One of them for sure. So I had the pleasure of getting to go to this private gallery and see all of the work up close on my own. Helen Frankenthaler, Jack Bush, Jules Olitsky, all these incredible artists between the 50s and the 70s. And while I was walking through the gallery, a gentleman that kind of manages the inventory of the gallery, what they're shipping out and what they're keeping in stock, he gave me a brilliant insight. He told me, as we were looking at Helen Frankenthaler, that all of the artists that we had seen throughout the day, even though they were abstract artists, that they were the most technically gifted and knowledgeable artists in the world. And in order for them to be so good at breaking the rules, they had to learn all of the rules. They had to understand the history of art. They had to understand every little detail. And for someone starting out in art, myself, I was like, oh well, this is the ingredient for me to get better. This is the only way that I could pursue my dreams at a higher level. I have to start learning. So I started studying art history, and every day I would sit down at my computer, and I'd look up a painter, and I'd learn something cool about him. And the next day I'd look at a painting and learn something cool about it. And over time, just being consistent, I started to build a bit of a knowledge base, started to put things together, and kind of develop a voice. And up until this point, I didn't really have a social media presence, pretty much unknown to the world. But I started trying different things, and one of those things was storytelling. I thought it would be. I'm learning all of this cool stuff. Storytelling was a good outlet to remember what it was that I had studied, and just by luck, it started to pick up, and here we are today, a year and a half later from when I started, and I have, built an audience and a voice, and it's how we've connected, and here we are. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And one of the artists which you've done several sort of reels about across social media is Caravaggio. And
Yes.
Caravaggio is a big artist, both me and Diane and you are, I imagine, are very much interested in. So
Yes.
the first question we were sort of wondering, sort of explore art history, is what differentiates Caravaggio? What makes his artwork so valuable in your opinion?
I think I think uh, an overarching theme that I've noticed across all periods of art and all forms of art is I've come to the realization that art is an expression of your cumulative experiences. And a lot of the times, the way that we consume the world around us has a direct relationship to the things that we project onto the world. And Caravaggio is kind of in this unique situation where he comes to Rome. The church at the time is dealing with the Reformation. So Martin Luther, I think it was 1517 or 1520, around there, kind of reforms the church. The church, as an institution, starts to lose credibility. And you have this guy that comes into Rome, and he's an incredible painter. And the church seizes an opportunity for their own propaganda of sorts because they need to start winning people back. And prior to um, an era of Caravaggio, a lot of the our artwork has always been a good way of talking to people and sharing stories and convincing people about whatever your narrative is. So Caravaggio comes into the scene at this perfect time, and the church seizes an opportunity for storytelling through his work, and they want to create artwork that is maybe a little bit more relatable for the common person in Rome. And it just so happens Caravaggio uh, spent a lot of time amongst common people. He was a common person. So what I find unique about Caravaggio is, you know, he would go he would model a prostitute. He would take a prostitute from the street, and then he would use that person as a model for the Virgin Mary. And that's if you think about it on the surface, it's unheard of. It's crazy, like a prostitute, and you're using that as Virgin Mary. But it was true of his experiences. This is something that he did, right? He enjoyed that stuff. He would go drinking. He would gamble. He would do all of these things. He was a real human being. So he took these elements that were real, and then he put them into religious art that would be put in the church, that was commissioned by a cardinal, commissioned by the Vatican. And I think that element in itself that is what sets him apart from everyone else. And when you look at other artists of the period, like if we look at someone within a close range, like Artemisia Gentileschi, which is another famous Baroque painter who covered a lot of the same subject matter. She's another incredible artist, but there's a clear distinction between the two. You on one side, you're looking at a very personal story. Obviously, her work can be defined by her personal experiences, trouble with her father, trouble with being a woman navigating Rome at that time. And then you look at Caravaggio and his style of work, and he's, like I said, taking a prostitute from the street and painting them, and taking a very, very human, real, raw element and bring it into the narrative of the church. And it's a sight to see. Caravaggio's a spectacular painter. For that, I think, especially.
So, talking about Caravaggio, how much do you think there can be a difference made in Caravaggio the person, Caravaggio the artist? Because, there's all these stories about questionable things that he did during his lifetime.
Totally.
How much do you think that affected sort of his art, or do you think you can sort of separate the two?
I don't think you can separate the two. I think they're perfectly relatable. I think I think his work really is a perfect representation of who he was. I'll give you a beautiful example. I had only learned this less than a year ago, and I thought about this for weeks after learning this story. I thought it was so cool. There's a famous painting that he has called Bacchus, and it's it's Bacchus. I don't remember what the other name for the god is, but he paints a painting of Bacchus, and Bacchus is the god of wine and the god of seduction and the god of, but he's also the god of madness. So he paints this portrait of Bacchus, and he's drinking some wine, and he's very seductive. And in the bottom left of the painting is a jug, like a decanter of sorts. And in the reflection of the decanter, if you really have to look to see it, there seems to be the reflection of a person. It looks like Caravaggio, and it looks like he's drowning in the wine. And what does it all mean? I mean, it could just be a little detail. It doesn't it? There's so many ways to interpret that, but the way that I had interpreted it was he knew the subject matter, what he was painting. So he knows that this is the god of wine. He also knows this is a god of seduction. He also knows that this is a god of insanity and madness. And he is a person who's probably, at the time that he painted it, spiraling out of control himself. He comes to Rome, he's got all of these commissions, he's starting to make money, things are going really good for him, but he's an alcoholic and he likes to drink and he likes to party, he likes all of this trouble. So he paints this beautiful picture of Bacchus seducing him, and it's almost for me a metaphor for him understanding his own downfall. It's like he's being seduced into madness. He can't break himself away from this vice that's going to ultimately become his downfall. And all of his work in some way resembles an aspect of himself, whether it's something like that, whether it's something like his David and Goliath. He's literally holding his own head, and it's, you could interpret that painting as a young version of himself and an older version of himself, and everything is directly connected to his experiences. Yeah, I don't think there's a way to break the two apart.
So yeah, that is such a really good argument now you say it, because art is almost a reflection of the artist, as you were saying. So how can you separate the two if they almost paint themselves in it?
They, it's like if you have a person who builds homes, or they frame homes, and they have nothing about them on the surface seems artistic. Okay, they've never tried an artistic form, but they've been hammering nails for 50 years. In some way, shape, or form, the action of hammering nails is an expression of 50 years worth of experiences in order for them to get to this thing. This thing, in some way, as primitive as it is some form of expression and a reflection of their experiences. Caravaggio and other artists are no different. They're maybe doing something that's a little bit more detailed, or quite a bit more detailed than when we talk about that comparison. But everything he's doing is an expression of him in some way. It's all tied to a series of experiences that he's had. So it's impossible not to it's impossible to drive a wedge down the middle and say that these things are different. They have to be one and the same.
So, do you think that applies to all artists? For example, Picasso's another person that we'll get onto, but he was sort of very much a womanizer.
Totally.
Very much sort of led that kind of life, but then his paintings are what they are now, incredibly famous. So, do you think that part of Picasso can be separated, or do you think him being a womanizer influenced his art?
I don't think that necessarily. I think that there are aspects of his work, or certain pieces, that you could definitely see some of that come through. I think on a broader sense, what we see come through with Picasso is a need to play at the highest level. So if you look at Picasso through his career, right, Picasso would always look to studying great artists to elevate his own work, and that's consistent from the before his blue period all the way to the end of his life. He was a student of art. I think that that thing is bigger than some of the personal characteristics of Caravaggio, and that is a major driver for the direction that his work went. And also, it's also something that you can see across his work. You know, Caravaggio, his Blue Period, a lot of it is inspired by the mannerism qualities of El Greco. And if you look at a lot of his Blue Period, you can see a lot of the similar forms and the ways that he uses contrast and values. You could take any El Greco painting and look at a Blue Period painting and start to see similarities. And for me, what that says is it's a person who was desperate to be really great. So he studied someone extensively who he thought was really great, and then that study became a foundation for him to elevate his own art. And then if you look a little bit further, so Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which was painted in 1907, it is the first. It's the proto-cubist painting. It's the first real painting that start to show characteristics of cubism, or and the way and all of the styles of which you would recognize Picasso today. That painting, you can tie a lot of that to African tribal art. Is one aspect. You could also tie elements to El Greco again. The forms, the way that the forms are in that painting, and if you look at a painting called "The Opening of the Fifth Seal" by El Greco, you'll see a lot of similarities in the way the forms are set. And then obviously, if you look at any African tribal art, you can see the similarities in the forms as well. So Picasso was constantly trying to improve. He was constantly using great art as a reference for his own art. And in that way, there's no separation between him and his work. He is, in every respect, his art. And his art is, in every respect, him. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And also, if for me, one of the most striking paintings of Picasso is Guernica.
Yes.
I think could you talk more about that painting? What do you think made him do that?
I'm so happy that you're asking me this, because I was hired to write for a Picasso exhibit in Hong Kong, and I've been writing all week about Guernica, because that's the video that we're talking about. So this wasn't planned. This is perfect. This is so good. So Guernica again is an example of Picasso referencing other things in order to elevate his own narrative. Okay. 1937, Spanish Pavilion, or Spanish Republican government wants to hire Picasso to do a painting for the World Fair. And the Spanish Republican government was an anti-nationalist movement in Spain. So in Spain, you had a dictator, Franco. I believe it was Franco.
Yeah.
Right? And Spanish Republican government were the opposing side to that. So they wanted to have a pavilion, and they wanted to commission Picasso to do something that was anti-nationalist. Now, initially, he really didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do something so political. But the bombing of Guernica happened, and newspapers all around Europe are showing these images of the bombing, and it broke his heart. From what I could see, it was shocking. It was shocking to everyone. So he finally agrees to do Guernica, and he does this massive painting, and he styles it. So initially, the composition is styled after a painting by Francisco Goya called "The 2nd of May," and it was a revolution painting that Goya had done. And now Picasso styles the composition in the same way, but instead of using color, he colors the painting in the way that he had seen the event, which was through newspapers, so black and white photography. And when I had learned that, I thought it was fascinating that he had taken the way he had experienced the event and put it into the work, because the way he experienced it was enough to convince him to do it. it broke him. It was destruction and chaos, and he'd witnessed it in this lifeless black and white photo. So he paints in black and white to show you how he felt, and it's incredible. And just on those two things alone, I thought it was amazing. And then I learned this week, and this was the coolest thing. And I need to get these guys' names right. So on the left and right of the painting are two figures. I'm gonna pull this up right now. Robert Capa. So Picasso he wasn't just he wasn't just a fan of painting. He was a student of all art forms, which is evident in him studying tribal masks for Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And he was also a student of photography. And there were two photographers that had covered some of the atrocities under Franco. One of them was named Robert Capa, and the other was named David Chim Seymour. So Robert Capa takes a photo. I believe it was 1935, and it was called "The Falling Soldier." And if you Google it, for any of the audience that's listening to this, Google the image of the falling soldier, and then if you pull up a picture of Guernica, on the right side of the painting is a gentleman who is modeled after the character in the person in the photo by Robert Capa, and on the left side of the painting, he modeled the woman feeding her baby. He modeled that after a photo by Chim Seymour, which was shot in 1936, called "The Nursing Mother," and he took these photography references of the Spanish Civil War. He took that newspaper photography that gave him the feeling. He used tragedy in Goya's painting to convey tragedy, and he uses all of that to, in 3 weeks, complete Guernica. And Guernica now becomes what it is today, which is this anti-war movement. It's bigger than just a painting. It's a symbol of anti-war. It's a symbol of reminding us of the pitfall of humanity, which is that we're chaotic, we're irrational sometimes, we do things that are disgusting and horrible, and he does this painting in the hopes that we never make these mistakes again. And of course, if you know your history, 2 years later the Second World War started, so it didn't really work in the sense that it didn't end war, but it does stand for something really good. And yeah, I Guernica is a phenomenal. What a piece.
As I say, it's so interesting because when I think of Guernica and as you speak about it, you realise that it really is this almost historical and almost philosophical expression of the time. And especially that about it being like the newspaper, that's really interesting just because that is obviously how they were getting their news. So, because it's all in black and white, I'm correct in saying.
It's all black and white, all of it. And you also come from a period of time that is photography is the medium that starts to break the chain of academic art. So the introduction of photography and those principles combined with the Impressionist movement start to break the chains of representative art, because photography is a great placeholder for representation. It's shooting something that's really there. And you see this break, this fork in the road with artwork, pre and post the introduction of photography. So photography comes in and it's all done in black and white at that time, and everything is done in black and white. And there's art painting gets into this really abstract expressionism. As an example, is a super colorful thing, a very interpretive thing. And Picasso, he has all of the choices. He has every choice. He could make any choice on this painting, and he decides to go black and white because he wants to suck the soul out of the painting. He wants to really share the burden of what his experience. And it's one of the coolest details I've ever found studying art. It's one of the reasons why I love Picasso, because despite all of his flaws, and there are so many of them, you have to appreciate genius when you see it. You know, every I think every person is flawed. It's the same as Caravaggio. He was a murderer at the end of the day, right? He murdered someone. He was on the run for the last few years of his life, but his genius is undeniable. You know, I probably wouldn't want to be his friend, but I can't. You can't take away the fact that he did something incredible. And same with Picasso. Same with Dali. Same with a bunch of people, right?
Well, mentioning Dali,
Yeah.
so that leads on perfectly, really, into the next big artist that would be really interesting to talk about. I went to the Dali Museum in Spain, in his native town, and after a couple of hours, I went out with one of the biggest headaches I've had in years. What do you think is so sort of striking about his art? Because you kind of look at it, and even though it looks crazy at first, when you actually read the sort of explanation or sort of his thoughts, then it gets a whole new layer of sort of meaning.
I Dolly is an interesting figure. I spent a good portion of my time in the arts not liking Dolly, a good portion of it. I thought, you know, his technique is undeniable, but I just didn't understand him. I didn't get it. And every time I would look at his work, I'd say, it's too chaotic. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not. It doesn't resonate with me. And I recently saw a painting that he done called Adolescence, and I had nothing to do in the day. It was about 3 p.m. So you know what? Let's just look at the painting. Let's research a little bit. Let me try and convince myself on Salvador Dali. So I look at this painting called Adolescence, and again, if you have a computer by you, pop up the painting and look at it. It's going to be worth it. So on the surface, the painting is quite interesting. It has it looks like two things. You could look at it and see a face of the face of someone, and you could also look at it and see a woman and child sitting on a beach. It's just, you know, surrealism has this ability to make us see a bunch of different things, and that's cool on its own, but it's not spectacular. The thing with Dali is, as you uncover clues about the painting, meanings start to take shape, things start to take shape, and where you think it would end, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. It never really ends. So again, you look at this painting, you see a face, doesn't mean much. Then you start to ask the question, okay, well, who are those two figures that are making up the face? Well, one of the figures, it turns out, was his nurse, a nurse maid that his family had hired when he was a child. And it turns out that the child was him. Now that's pretty interesting as it is. But we continue to dig a little bit deeper. And what we then come to realize is the setting of the painting. It was a beach that his family used to visit when he was a child. So now you're starting to look at something that you uncover that this painting might actually be like a memory. He's a child, he's with the nursemaid, he's at this beach that his family used to go to. A little bit more interesting, right? We're getting a little bit deeper into his experiences. And then you notice in the top left corner a detail. If you didn't see it off the front, you probably wouldn't have noticed it. In the top left corner of the painting, it says "pour vous," which in French means "for you," and it was a "pour vous" was a magazine that was a film magazine that was very popular in France up until the German invasion of France. And once the Germans had invaded France, the magazine had ceased to exist. So he took the magazine Pour Vous, he paints over the magazine, and he uses the face of the actress on the front of the magazine to create the eyes and the nurse and the child, right? So what does the war have to do with anything? Well, what does the magazine and the war effectively ending the magazine have to do with anything? It kind of sounds like a random out of place detail. Again, that is until you dig deeper, which it turns out that evokes a memory for him. When Dali was a young boy, he visited a war parade. And at this war parade, he saw a girl who he had interest in. And he was pretty young, but he's a young guy. He sees this beautiful girl. Her name was, I really hope I don't pronounce this incorrectly. I think it's Galuchka. I think that's right. I hope that's right. He sees Galuchka and he can't contain himself. He's like, holy crap. Galuchka's looking at me. What do I do? I'm freaking out. This is the girl that I love. All of my, all of my desires are for this person, and she's staring at me. I'm freaking out right now. So the only thing he knows, he doesn't know what to do. So he finds his nursemaid and he hides behind her. And his nursemaid is the only thing that can shield him from her gaze. And this is a true story. He tells the story. So we know that it's true. We know that all of this is true because it's from the source's mouth. So he hides behind the nursemaid, and that's what's able to break the gaze from Galuchka. And it takes place at this military parade, and now we understand this, and we step back again and we look at the painting, and then what we see is in the painting, the face that we initially saw at the beginning of the painting is actually a symbol of the memory that he has. He's the giant gaze of this thing, and he's hiding behind the nursemaid, and it's tied together perfectly, and it's taking place at a war parade, which is where the memory's from, and the war had ended this magazine's life. And so there are all of these spectacular little details that when you uncover them, they all mix together. And there's probably things in the painting that I don't even understand. There may be another detail that's something else, and another detail that's something else. But even in my limited knowledge of the painting, that was incredible for me, and that was enough for me to convince me on Salvador Dali. And I think that is a good characteristic across his entire body of work. As you uncover one thing at a time and get deeper and deeper, his paintings take on bigger and bigger meanings, and it's unlike anyone else.
That is quite interesting, because almost behind all that chaos, there clearly are these sort of wormholes of symbolism, which is so rich.
It's so rich. It's so cool. I wasn't expecting those feelings. I wasn't expecting that. I had completely written him off, and I wasn't interested in him in any way, shape, or form. And every time somebody would talk about him, I would just doesn't do it for me. I don't get it. Now I have a bit of a man crush, an art crush. I'm like, this guy's so cool. I need to know everything about him. And again, he's another controversial figure. He's a person that, depending on how you want to view him, there are many reasons to not like the person. There are many reasons to like the person. It all depends on where you come from. But he's undeniable in his talent, and he's undeniable in his ability to express something. And that it's really important to draw that distinction. We live in a time, it's normal to have feelings about someone, but we have to recognize what they've done. He did something spectacular over the course of his career, and that he's an artist worth looking into for sure and studying deeper.
So another question about another artist who's, I think, John's favorite, if I'm not wrong, is Rembrandt. So what do you think makes Rembrandt unique? Why is he considered to be sort of one of the greatest painters in Western culture?
I think that Rembrandt from a, I don't know a ton about Rembrandt from the personal perspective, like who the man was, what his experiences were like. But I can speak to Rembrandt from a technical perspective. I think Rembrandt comes at a time where you have a you don't have an academic art in the sense in the way that the, academic art was prevalent in France, leading up to Impressionism. But you have a period of artwork that is heavily based on like religious narratives and religious stories, and then you have Rembrandt come in, and Rembrandt he captures light and emotion through his brushstrokes in a way that maybe no one else ever really had. And I look to painting like Night Watch. Do you like that painting, Night Watch?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, I've got to say.
One of my favorites too. When I first started studying art, that was one of the first paintings I looked at because it's so famous. And you look at what he does from a technical perspective, and it's fascinating. I mean, the way that he foreshortens the spear is unlike anything you've seen before, and the way that he lights the figures is incredible. Right? It's so rich. He's clearly highlighting this company of people who would walk around the streets at night, and I believe it would be in Amsterdam, walk around Amsterdam at night and kind of patrol the streets and guard everything. And what's cool about that painting is initially the groups that would patrol the streets were held in such high regard. They were revered for their I guess they were, you know, they're just held to a certain standard. They're held high. And when Rembrandt paints the Night Watch, it's at a period of time where their role becomes a little bit less necessary, but they're still held in some regard, but they're not as necessary. They're not what they were 100 years prior. So when he paints Night Watch, what you're looking at is, yes, it's like something to admire. The people are something to admire, but he kind of paints them in a light that also shows that they're not as serious as before. They're not like a dignified group of soldiers. He paints them as people who are a little bit. There's a bit of chaos to Night Watch, and I think Rembrandt does a good job of capturing the time that he lived in really well. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, from a technical perspective as well, are there any other artists who really sort of stand out to you?
Yeah, lots. There's tons. Yeah, like Diego Velasquez is a great example of an artist who was probably, many could argue in the way that many could argue Caravaggio as being the technical best. You could argue that Caravaggio was as well, or sorry, Velasquez was as well. Velasquez was a brilliant painter who had a unique career. He's one of the first artists. He's not the first artist, but one of them surely to uh, be regarded. You know, he was in the royal circles. He was in the part of this royal court. He was a real like celebrity artist. He made art um, spectacular, and being an artist spectacular, and he knew it too. So his paintings were a good representation of understanding that he was above. You know, he treated art above royalty in a sense. You can see it in Las Meninas. There's lots of ways to interpret Las Meninas, but one of the ways you could interpret that painting is by looking at it through the lens of, it's a statement from Velasquez to say that art supersedes everything, even royalty, even the gods. It's the gods, art, and then royalty. Velasquez is a good example. I look from a technical perspective, even though you may look at someone like Edouard Manet, and any of the Impressionist people is less technically gifted than a Caravaggio. They're technically gifted in completely different sets of skills, but equally gifted. Um, Paul Cézanne, another great example of like technical prowess, probably regarded by most. He's like the master's master. You know, any great painter would look to Paul Cézanne and say that he was the best. You know, especially Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso. They would always look to him and say he was the greatest painter to ever live. So many artists that had great technical foundations and were great contributors to the art world.
I think the last question is probably one that's a bit different, but if you could have dinner with three artists of all time, living or dead, who would they be and why?
Wow, that's tough. That's a good question. Probably, probably Michelangelo.
Yeah.
I think Michelangelo. I I enjoy. There's a very human aspect to him. There's a very relatable aspect to him. That you know, you're talking about an artist that painted in 1500s, so it's hard to feel like you could connect with them. But what Michelangelo did on the Last Judgment, the painting on the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel, um, he basically all of the his enemies and all of the people that had something to say about him, he used the opportunity to basically say screw you to all of them, and he painted people in. And he was very catty in that way, and I find that to be hilarious and interesting and relatable. So him for sure, I think that would be a fun person to have dinner with. Uh, Someone like Edouard Manet, because Edouard Manet, he did something at a time that it on its own may not be spectacular. It may not be a difficult thing to do. You know, Edouard Manet introduces a painting Les Déjeuners sous l'Aube to the salons in Paris, and he does so. He creates a painting of four people sitting in a park, and there's a nude woman and a woman in bath, and two gentlemen sitting with the woman. They're kind of having a picnic, and there's nothing about it maybe on the surface that seems that radical, but doing a painting like that in the face of scrutiny. So when you have an academy, the Academy des Beaux-Arts, which it's an institution that is essentially dictating what is good art and what's not good art, and their opinion really matters. And you have an institution like that, and a bunch of critics and a bunch of people saying that this isn't what you're supposed to do, and this is really really bad. And you have someone like Edouard Manet do a painting like Les Déjeuners sous l'Aube, and continues to paint in a style that is realistic and a better portrayal of who he is as a person, opposed to doing something that's by an academic standard. I think it takes a lot of bravery. I think it takes a lot of courage to stand up to do what you really felt like, and he revolutionized the art world. So I would want to have dinner with him as well. And I'll give you one more, maybe. I think I think I would have dinner with Picasso, because I'd want to understand I'd want to just feel what having dinner with someone that motivated is like, someone that driven. He clearly was, despite all of his flaws. The man was motivated to be the best, and for a long part of his career, he really was. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about him today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Fair?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think we'd probably quite like to join you at that dinner party. No.
You're more than one. Please. It would be great. I would love that. Would love
Perfect.
that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Fantastic episode. Really, really interesting. I think we learned a lot, and everyone listening is also learning a huge amount about these people who've done really something so extraordinary. I mean, living in the 1500s and getting talked about 500 years later it's not easy.
It's spectacular. You know, one something that only something that everyone would dream of for sure,
Yeah,
to leave a legacy like that. And guys, thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope that I was able to pass on some value for you and for your audience. And
definitely.
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah.
this was a lot of fun. I'd be happy to do it again. This is really cool.
Oh yes.
Perfect.
A big thank you to Matthew, and a big thank you to everyone who's listened. Do please check out Matthew at the Fine Arts Collective on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. All right, saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
See you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.